one of the greatest JRPGs of all time, telling a story that would echo throughout generations of gaming, validating the platform as not only a means for enjoyment, but a medium for art itself. An experience that can only be understood by those who have gone on the journey this game has to offer. Final Fantasy VII. Or at least that's what I've been told. You see, Final Fantasy VII came out in 1997, but I myself didn't come out of the womb until 1999. So while the world was looking like this,
Chicken McNuggets.
I want to see some crisp passing.
I was looking at this.
Quiet Coyote! It's easy to get turned around. This isn't the great beyond, it's the great before.
The Great Before?
Despite this game being 2 years older than me, growing up, I would still hear of how it was one of the greatest games of all time, whether it be from word of mouth or video game news outlets like G4. Rest in peace. So you can imagine my excitement when it was announced that the classic was getting remade and released on the PS4. Then you can imagine what it was like for me to wait 5 years for it to actually come out. But the day had finally come, April 10th, 2020. I went to Target to pick up my copy of the cleverly titled Final Fantasy VII Remake, only to find that they were completely sold out because no one had anything better to do at the beginning of quarantine other than play video games. So I marched back home, went on the PlayStation Store, and downloaded all 90 gigabytes at 30 megabits per second, watching the progress move about as fast as this guy. Cut to a couple weeks later, and I beat the game after about 35 hours of playing. However, I was met with a to be continued screen. I was pretty confused because, unbeknownst to me, Square Enix, the developer of Final Fantasy VII and its remake, decided to have the remake be episodic rather than one big game. Kinda like how they turned The Hobbit, which was one book, into 3 movies, but instead of big feet, there's big swords. So it turns out the 35 hours I played throughout was actually an expanded version of the first 6 hours of the original 40-hour adventure. Obviously, I was disappointed because I was expecting to play through the entire story, which had been hyped up to me throughout my entire adolescence, but was only given the introduction. And I wasn't the only one who felt let down, with plenty of commenters and bloggers talking about how they would have executed things differently. Despite this disappointment, however, there was one thing I couldn't deny. I loved the game. First off, purely from a technical standpoint, they nailed it. They made this look like this. They made this sound like this. And turn this into this. Making me go like this. The entire time I was playing this game, I was completely in awe of how beautiful it was. I mean, look at these graphics. I felt like I was watching a Pixar movie the entire time. For me, playing through this game was like visiting Disneyland for the first time. You run around exploring places and meeting characters that you've only ever heard references of, hitting aha moment after aha moment, finally understanding what everyone else was talking about. But instead of waiting in line for 45 minutes just to take a picture with Mickey Mouse or Donald, you get a group of companions that continue to grow and bond with you throughout the adventure. Of course, people already fell in love with these characters the first time around when playing the original Final Fantasy VII, but with this game, the players are given so much more to latch onto when it comes to the cast. Let's take the characters Jessie, Wedge, and Biggs into account. In the original game, they were merely side characters who were only really viewed as plot fodder. Kinda like how in Infinity War, there's these ugly alien people that help Thanos, and you kinda know they exist, but you really know nothing else about them. But in this game, they each have their own background stories and quirks that can only really be explored in the extended amount of time we had with them. And this concept runs even deeper with the main cast. Square Enix really took the time to make sure that you fall in love with all of these characters. Some more than others. So much so that it gets to the point that you're physically cheering for these guys whenever they reach certain character points. Just look at what my roommate and I were doing.
Don't be scared. Oh yeah!
Although I, like many others, was disappointed in its early ending, after reflecting on the ride that was the Final Fantasy VII Remake, it began to dawn on me that what was given to us wasn't something unfinished or incomplete, but instead the first steps taken by a developer to properly acknowledge their magnum opus. Square Enix saw an opportunity to not just retell their beloved story, but really take a dive into the world they created. The only reason they were receiving criticism for it is because they did such a good job at it. I mean, just look at how the internet collectively rejoiced when it was announced that they were releasing a mini chapter for the PlayStation 5. Had they just done a straight one-to-one remake, people would have clamored for additional content anyway. So why not just incorporate all supplemental materials into the main story? People were asking for this remake for decades because in the end, they wanted more Final Fantasy VII. And now they're getting more than they could have ever asked for, so there really shouldn't be much room for criticism. Square Enix really has a chance to create something even better than what they originally had. And I know, for a fact, that when the next chapter of this remake comes out, I'm going to be standing in line right next to the people that were complaining this entire time. And we'll all be equally as excited, because there's really no denying how good these games are.